Hey YouTube, Origami here, welcome back to the channel, and today we're covering another new deck that I've briefly mentioned in previous videos, and this is the Diamond Cascade Deck, and it's a budget beatdown / rush deck. I don't particularly like this deck and I'll explain more about that at the end, but it's one of the last two decks that we've not covered yet that is still relevant to the meta. The last one being Grateful Life, and it does have many variants that I'm contemplating which one to feature. Then back to this deck, I've pretty much slowly pulled all 4 copies of Diamond Cascade, which I think is the only expensive card in this deck. The deck total cost is about 11.8k DMP, 12k DMP let's say, which is just about budget enough I think. And I think it's pretty popular in the current meta, although it's not as simple as it seems. Tiers in general can be quite meaningless, so maybe from now on I'll just state what tier the website has it in and then I'll just give my own opinion, but you don't have to take either of it seriously because it's such a subjective thing. It's currently listed as a tier 1.5 deck, but to me it plays like a tier 2 deck, perhaps even lower, and we'll talk more about it at the end. So let's get into that deck profile first. I'll start off with Diamond Cascade, of course, since the whole deck is named after it. We play 4 of Diamond Cascade. Mana Evolution evolves off a nature creature in your mana zone. When this enters the battle zone, you may return all your other snow fairies from your mana zone to your hand, then put all snow fairies from your graveyard into your mana zone. And this card gets plus 3000 power for each of your other snow fairies and also Powered Breaker. So obviously this card runs off having more snow fairies. Probably the Powered Breaker is the most important aspect of it. It's 5000 power naturally. With 1 snow fairy it's a double breaker, and from then on with every additional 2 it breaks 1 more shield. So it's a very explosive creature. Power breaker on an evolution means potentially a double triple breaker that can attack on the turn that is summoned. The snow fairy effect can also give you cards in your hand and more untapped mana potentially, but to some extent I think that part of the effect can't really be manipulated consistently, because you have to charge what you have to charge, and a lot of times you don't really control what dies and ends up in the graveyard. It doesn't seem very powerful on first look, but I emphasize this once again: a Powered Breaker creature that can attack on the turn it's summoned. Truly very explosive. On to the cards that support it. First up we have 4 of Hearty Captain Polligon. 1 mana, 2k. At the end of your turn, if this creature broke any shields this turn, return it to your hand. It's a potential early shield breaker, but also an easy 1 mana snow fairy body count. We play 2 of this Duel Tulip. Your nature evolution creatures cost 1 less to summon. If it's a creature that has the Enlighten in the name, it costs an additional 1 less to summon. It can't cost less than 1 or the number of the creature's civilizations. So you play a lot of nature mana evolution, so this helps your curve very well. This card goes into Diamond Crack on 3, a card that we'll talk more about it later, but that is a very good move in terms of the curve. We only play 2 because it's not a snow fairy and there's no point really having too many of it. Being able to utilize just 1 is good enough and it won't disrupt the snow fairy count by too much. I've seen some lists that completely exclude it, and I think that's fine if you want to. Definitely not core to the deck, but I think it provides very good value. Next up we play 4 of this Mad Sakuran, Cursed Ice Fairy. If you have an evolution creature in the battle zone, this creature gets plus 4000 power. Very straightforward. This is a snow fairy and has a good effect that synergizes with evolutions, which are the core creatures in this deck, such as Diamond Cascade. So obviously you can put it down on 2, but when you subsequently summon your evolution creatures, it becomes a 5000 attacker at 2 mana cost. Great value as a body, but also a snow fairy count. We play another 4 of this evolution blueprint. Shield trigger, reveal the top 6 cards of your deck. Put all evolution creatures from the revealed cards into your hand and put the rest at the bottom of your deck in any order. So this deck's important cards, like I said, are mostly evolutions. The point of this card is actually to avoid a game where you're sort of drawing dead into just normal non-evolution snow fairies. Searching 6 for an evolution is really a good shot, and even if you don't really hit any of it, those non-evolutions are going to the bottom of your deck, so it improves your odds of getting it subsequently. So a good card for consistency purposes. Next up, another interesting inclusion. We play 4 of Huckle, Kirin, Sawyer, Jungle Governor. We've seen this card before from the Nature / Darkness Rush deck from way back when. Mana Evolution on top of a nature creature in your mana zone. It has Shield Force. Your creatures can't be blocked by creatures that have less power than them. So Shield Force, if you don't know, is as long as your shields don't get broken, this effect stays. A good mana evolution which provides an attack, but also giving your creatures cannot be blocked by creatures less powerful is super useful, especially for Diamond Cascade itself. If it goes up high in terms of power, you don't want your powered breaker to be slowly blocked each turn by, throwaway creatures instead of breaking 2 to 3 shields. This is not a Snow Fairy though, but a very powerful card in terms of perhaps pushing for lethal. Then we play 4 of Ochappi, Pure-Hearted Faerie, and this is an interesting one. At the end of each turn, if you have added another nature card from your shields to your hand that turn, you may discard that card and then summon this creature from your hand for no cost. When this enters the battle zone, you may search your graveyard for cards and put 1 into your mana zone. So it's almost a pseudo shield trigger effect. You're able to summon it by discarding the nature shield card to summon it for free, but since you've discarded a card, the second effect can sort of add it to your mana subsequently. It's also a Snow Fairy, and I don't know how to feel about this card. It feels like a rush card, but I guess it's just value and another body you can put out quickly for Diamond Cascade. We play 4 of Kaolun, Faerie of Warming Ice. At the end of each turn, if a card left your mana zone that turn, you may put the top card of your deck into the mana zone. An interesting effect because it ties in with Diamond Cascade. It can be quite draining to play Diamond Cascade's effect. You want to replenish your hand, but at the same time, if it drains out too much from your mana such that you can't even play the cards that you're taking out, then there's no point in that. But Kaolun doesn't really solve the issue, but it does alleviate it a bit in that sense. The other thing is mana evolutions taking out the evolution source from the mana zone also counts, so that's good value in that sense. And it's also a Snow Fairy count, so a very good inclusion, especially when comboing with other cards. Next up, we play 4 of Diamond Crack, one of the important evolutions. I always find the name hilarious, although maybe I'm just immature. Of course, mana evolution once again on top of a nature creature in your mana zone. At the end of your turn, if your opponent has more mana than you, put the top 2 cards of your deck into the mana zone. A good evolution attacker, Snow Fairy count, but its effect also is pretty good, considering that a lot of decks are playing ramp, and on top of that, you've just -1 mana from the mana evolution of Diamond Crack itself. Odds are that the 2 mana ramp is gonna proc and is actually so much value. We've covered the Diamond Cascade. The last cards are actually the Shield Trigger package, the 3 Holy Ore as well as 3 Corteo Spirit Knight. For those of you unfamiliar with this card, Shield Trigger, when this enters the battle zone, for each of your creatures in the battle zone, tap one of your opponent's untapped creatures at random. So both of the Shield Triggers are about tapping your opponent's creatures. And a lot of times we think that cards like Holy Ore are for anti-rush, which yes is true, but ironically it's even stronger with rush, being able to tap all your opponent's blockers so that you can attack yourself. These two are almost strictly used as shield triggers. Under normal circumstances, there should always be something better to play than either of these two from your hand, but getting them off shield triggers is very good. Which of course means that if you want to play more Holy Ore or less Corteo, that kind of thing, this is Shield Trigger package. It's up to you to tweak however you like. I think the water variant of this deck also includes, cards like Aqua Surfer if you want to consider that, but I think this is just a more straightforward list with the Holy Ore and the Corteos. So obviously no psychic creatures because the deck doesn't interact with the hyperspatial zone at all. But for decks like this, people might still want to fill up their hyperspatial zones to throw off your opponent, especially at the start of the game. I'm not particularly sure what you would want to mask your deck as, but it probably won't last for more than 2 turns I believe, because your mana charging options would usually give it away, but that part's just up to you. And that's it. One of the more popular decks in the current meta, probably because it's viewed as the budget deck of this season. Although I would still argue that the Firelight Rush deck from last season performs just as well as this deck and is even more budget than this deck. And it's also not as easy to play as it looks, by definition when you look at Diamond Cascade, it's probably a beatdown deck. You're trying to be explosive, scale well, and go back to basics by having bigger creatures and breaking more shields more efficiently. But there are some elements of rush in that, based on the current meta, you can't really drag out games because your creatures won't maintain that sort of advantage for very long. You do have to make an attempt for game perhaps between turns 5 to 7. Yet, you also don't want to attack at every single chance like a rush deck because it might be more beneficial for you to maintain your bodies on board, especially Snow Fairies, and not give your opponent any additional advantage in the early game. To me, it's a beatdown / rush deck with a lot of nuance, and usually that will be regarded as a good thing, versatile and fun probably. Unfortunately, the payoff for it is just so little, because to me it's not a better rush deck than the Firelight rush deck. It's not a better beatdown deck than the hyperspatial beatdowns right now, especially Raka. And if you guys play card games for as long as I have, you know that the appeal of this rush and beatdown decks to a certain extent are not just about the win rate. You know, most times the win rate of the decks are considered low compared to the usual meta deck. The appeal of these decks usually is that the games end fast and you don't have to think too much, making them very good for grinding rank. As long as their win rate is above 50%, it could be 52% and it's still potentially more effective than say a 56% win rate if you can complete 3 games in the time that it takes for them to complete 1 normal game. And of course, nuance and variation is always fun, but I think when the payoff is so insignificant, you're probably better off just playing another deck. And for this deck, in my opinion, it really is not there. But okay, I want to provide some of the pros at least to make it seem like a more neutral perspective. It's still a relatively budget deck, definitely accessible, functional, and competitive. It also interestingly doesn't have too bad a matchup against most decks in the meta, so there is no instant lose matchup, at least from what I've experienced. And this deck gives most meta decks a good fight each time, which I think some players value. Like, they don't want to play decks that have an instant lose opposition, and they find that every game, you know, being competitive and having the opportunity to win at least is something that they value when they are choosing their deck. So that's one thing you can consider. Personally, I just really dislike its gameplay, and to me it's in a very awkward space in the meta. But that's just me. You guys can make your own decisions on this one. To me, tier 2, I would rather recommend other decks over this one. And yeah, that's the end of this deck profile. Stay tuned for the gameplay as usual. If you have any questions about the deck or suggestions for other deck profiles, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, do help me drop a like on it to let me know, and I'll keep making more videos just like this one. And if you're new here, consider subscribing to the channel to stay up to date with more Duel Masters plays as well as other mobile gaming content. Forget about the notification bell, just subscribing would mean a lot to me. And alright, stay tuned for the gameplay. Stay safe. Bye bye.
결국 모든 것이 바꿔요 해가 떠오르는 커버린 사이코 같은 패턴에 눈이 돌아 몇 년 동안 사이코 이거 다 좋아하게 하고 싶어 미쳐버린 내가 과연 너를 이해되나 싶어 맘만 내면 이러는 게 정인 나를 좋아하지 마 다시 밤이 찾아오면 I got that fire I got that juice 밤이 되고 나면 fire 그처럼 물 한 배를 on my empire with that loose feeling like the 다 빛이 내리대며 밤이 된 I'm vampire 밤이 되면 I'm vampire get ready for the Beethoven and War One I sip the juice from the moonlight 언제나 전방대 밤이 되면 동광우 확대되지 Monday through everyday 창조 쭉 후회나 박대 모두가 창조돼 너는 더욱 맑아지는 느낌 변한 끝에 살아도 평생 나는 쥐심 묶임만 하며 그새 내 삶이라 되는지 잡아봐 내가 어디까지 가는지 그걸 내 고리는 하늘로 과연 내가 미쳐내지 못하는지 악마를 내가 가라앉기를 원하지 불꽃이 꺼지길 원해요 but 언제나 빛이 나니 정답이 뻔해지 정답이 got that fire I got that juice 밤이 되고 나 vampire on my empire with that loose feeling like I'm Alexander 다 빛이 내리대며 밤이 된 I'm vampire 밤이 되면 I'm vampire
Mixer
여유롭게 teasing 내 자유로운 soul 이미 beating 문제가 돈이라면 I'll be filled to rich but 걱정 따윈 없지 나를 rich 100m 따위는 너 언제나 보이는 건 no 속도로 내야 돼 pedal to the metal I don't really care just move out of my way Reaching for the stars, always on the right road 사실 어떤 길이라도 그게 상관없지 Finna make it work 늦더라도 고래 삶은 마치 롤렛 당치까지 rolling I put on down, give them all, give them 100 I got a lot of my mind 아직은 나 힘이 들어도 I'm grinding yeah 나는 나이 싫지 않아 목소리 내야 해 목소리 내야 돼 Got a different view 여유롭게 달려 더 빛나지 당연 내 삶은 shine like a diamond 괜히해서 뭐해 걱정 I got no worries no I got no worries no I got no worries no I'm shining like a diamond shining like a diamond yeah. I got no worries 걱정 따윈 없지 no 되기 원해 나를 맡겨 태양이 너무 가까워 나에게 들은 burning 난 방을 닫혀 담비가 내릴 때까지 huge yeah. 누가 나를 나보다 더 믿어 네가 날 버려도 아직 내가 있어 yeah. 너는 내가 무너지길 빌어 가끔 내가 위태해 보여도 never fall 구시한 함부로 성공이 나를 rom 먼저 향해 그런 위다 밟아 vroom vroom escalate 편법 원칙 따윈 게나 줘 오늘도 생고 방식대로 go Don't you love it 이게 사는 거지 뭐 모두가 shine bright 한지 모르고 있어 그저 이 밤이 나지 될 때까지 Keep on and on I tell you in my echoes whoa Got a different view 여유롭게 달려 내일은 더 빛나지 당연 yeah. 내 삶은 shine like a diamond 괜히 해서 뭐해 걱정